Welcome back to the Wet Pastelist. Today's wet technique is mixing oil stick or pigment sticks with soft pastel because it takes a while for pigment sticks to dry. Today's painting will be a little 12 by 12 painting that was done all with oil sticks, and I'm going to use soft pastel and demo how they react to the surfaces left with oil sticks. If you haven't used oil sticks, they're sometimes referred to as pigment sticks. There are plenty of videos out there on the web about using oil sticks. Some of my previous videos have shown me using oil sticks, but I want to focus on how the soft pastel reacts over the surface of the oil sticks. This is a 12 by 12 painting that I did in anticipation of a mixed media juried show. I ended up not using it. It has been on my fermentation wall for quite some time now. As you can see, there's some texture left by the pigment sticks. The pastel will stick to this. You run your hands across this and you can feel some of the texture areas. You can see I've cross-lit this a little bit and you can see some of the texture that is left from the pigment sticks here also. And you can see it's completely dry, so now we can paint pastel on top of this. The pastel adheres to this, and because there's just a subtle texture, all those strokes of the oil pigment sticks, you can see the layers coming through, which for me creates a lot of interest. I really like that. Now the advantage of using pastel over the pigment sticks is look how much more intense and bright the pure pigments are over the oil-based and wax bases of the pigment sticks. And look how fast it is also. And I just like the pigment. The reason I like those pigment sticks is it's very similar to the pastel. I grew up doing oil painting most of my life, and I switched to pastel only about 8-9 years ago. And I love the way that instead of mixing on a palette, you mix pastels on the board. And this is really, really fun. And I discovered the pigment sticks, and they are the same. While you can mix them on a palette, especially with that extender, you cut off a chunk and mix it on a palette and then spread it on with palette knives, squeegees, whatever tools that you want. This is also a way that, I can even, like I'm doing with this dry pastel, I can use the pigment sticks and blend two colors that I put on the panel. So the pigment sticks are really a neat way to do multimedia. But here I'm going to try to turn this into at least 80% surface area with traditional pastels. And I'm changing the color scheme up just a little bit. Those yellow greens and blue greens gray this color down when I put it over it. So knowing color theory is really important when you get ready to blend on the actual surface rather than on a palette, because red, orange, or reds and greens and yellows, those are work good with this red orange, and I know that when I add them and I blend them, I can get some grays, graying down effect, so it's not quite so intense as it is up in the sky. But even there, I had a little bit of blue-gray up in that sky, and so I was able to tone down some of those bright areas of the red-orange over that blue-gray. Now down in here, I had the yellow. Let's see, I can reestablish that yellow, and probably near the end of this, I'll do that. Just want to see what that does. I was afraid it was going to be too light, and it is. Something a little darker maybe down over these trees. A little darker pink violets in there. Yeah, that shows up much better. It's closer in value. And again, the texture is letting me show layers through. All this is becoming layered. One of my favorite palettes are oranges, blue violets, red violets. One of my favorite non-traditional palettes. So you see I'm really changing up, but I'm trying to do so in a way that I'm thinking about the colors that are underneath this, so that I can incorporate some of those, whether they become a way to gray down the pastel or a way to create darks when the pastel I lay over this comes through. I've got to blend this in order to reach my 80%. Now, I've brought up the word 80% phrase 80% several times. Typically in juried shows, you have to have a surface in pastel competitions, unless it's a mixed media or what they call pastel plus. Your goal is to create a finished surface that is at least 80%. Now there are some shows that they require 90%. But typically, and I don't know who goes through and measures every square centimeter of these things, so it's like you're kind of at these juried shows where they have percentage rules. You are basically, it's a let's be as honest as we can about this, and I try to be. I'm sure there's some, it's a big world out there, and we know that there's people that aren't honest, and for whatever reason they try to stretch the rules or come up with some sort of 80%. Oh, I didn't know you meant 80% of the surface. I thought you meant 80% of my time had to be on soft pastel. No, it's 80% of the surface. So hopefully they won't be playing those games, and if they do, they develop a reputation pretty quick and get some of these juried shows. If you break the rules, they ban you for 2 to 3 years. You can't submit and be a part of it. And believe me, if they're going to ban you and track you, that's the last thing you want to do is like, oh, I know him now, let's check his work out pretty careful. It's become untrustworthy in these shows. So there's an honor system, but if you try to stretch the rules, you'll develop a reputation that maybe you're not really after. You see, I put in my darks. That violet really made it go a lot darker than I really want it to be in the end, but got to start because I want some of those dark areas. You know how the ripples go across water? I want some of those dark areas to be able to be used for some of that. This magenta is a nice combination also with the oranges and the yellows. Now that's going to be toned down quite a bit before the finish. But it will create, look how just the texture and the mounting of this on a foam board creates these little areas that almost, I didn't have to individually paint this group of trees and this shadow underneath and this group of trees and this shadow underneath. That's all done with the texture, and that's why I love working with textures in pastel. I don't know, this might be a stretch. This blue-green, this is a really bright, intense color, but I know that magenta will gray it down some. So again, another reason to learn color theory really well is that you know what happens when you put these things in. Now, because this has a lot of white in it or paler colors, you can see how putting that in the distance, in those distant trees, it grayed it down. That magenta grayed it down. Look at the difference between what this was and what it is now. And I've got a little bit hint of the green so that but it's got that blue-green in there, that kind of turquoise, which I think really works well. with these colors up in there. And they work well in the distance. Now I'm going to lose, by doing this, you notice I didn't start out with my darks first. I could have, and in hindsight, I know that I'm going to have to go back over these lighter areas with some of those yellows and red oranges. But, you know, that's a matter of preference. I know a lot of people, everybody does something different. There's a lady I know who starts at the top of her painting and works her way down. And, you know, if you were in art school, the professor would come around and say, oh, you need to work on the whole painting all at once. And you probably heard me say that before too. But for me, every painting is different, and I don't know if it's just because of my experience level. So maybe working on the entire painting all at the same time is a good way to learn, but it's not a rule. And that brings us back to, let's get rid of these rules. Kind of really liking that color. Of course, that throws all these colors off, and I've got to reestablish some of those in probably with a little bit more blues or greens up in there. There we go. This thing started out green. And what have I done? I've gone right back to blue-green at least. Having a lot of fun with this. And again, this is over the oil pigment sticks. If I didn't mention it or forgot, those are Sennelier, but most of them are R&F. Sennelier is real buttery, just like R&F, but R&F, they don't dry as fast unless you put a drying extender in there. There's two types of extenders. So some of the immediacy of being able to work right back into this painting if you're starting it with oil stick, and I'm having fun doing that. I just started doing that this year, and I've really enjoyed those oil sticks, the oil pigment sticks, working that way into these things. But you do have to let it dry overnight. And then some of your lighter colors, like some of the whites and some of the pale yellows that they've got, that's got a lot of white in them, they don't dry as fast unless you stick an extender in there. There's different ways you can do that. You can look up, there's a lot of videos on oil stick, oil pigment. But one of the ways is you can put the drying extender, put a coat of it on your paper before you even start working on it. And that extender will mix as you start to paint with the paint you put on top, the mark making and things, and it will help it dry some of those colors. Pigment sticks like Shiva and I think Liquitex, some of the other brands, I'm not sure. I know Shiva, I've used it. I thought there was a Liquitex brand that I've used. And some of those tend to be really, really hard. They might be good for making thinner lines at the end, but I'm really liking the butteriness and the ability to use my hands to blend on the, I'll call it the canvas, the substrate, with the oil pigments, the same as I do. So I'm using one sort of painting technique between soft pastel and those oil sticks, those oil pigments. Now see, this has really gotten out of whack, so I'm going to balance that up now. But I'm really liking some of the subtleties, and already I've reached the 80% coverage because I've pushed this into the grain. So I'm not concerned about meeting the rules at this particular point. See if I can bring that in by switching to a peachy color instead of an orange. Getting some blending in here with the peaches. And I'll trade out those yellows for some pale peaches and things. And now you can see, because I did the highlights first and then I came in and did the darks, I can scumble over. That's why I wasn't too worried about going back into those highlights as I put the darks over, because I knew that I was going to have to go back and balance this color out. There, now you see that magenta is mixing with some of that peach, and I think we can control some of those things a little bit more. I'll have to get some more magenta and peach up in here, I think. Maybe in the future, put some things in the comment if you want to see it, but how to handle water and reflections. You know, you got several options, this way and this way, but there's some variations in between to be able to show ripples, be able to show texture in the water. This is really kind of glassy, no wind, a no windy day sort of effect that's on there. And it can almost start to look like ice if you're not careful, especially when you're working in the blues. Our mind tends to associate blue and water, the light blues in water, and dark blues sometimes when it's this smooth without ripples to be ice. I'm going to try this. This is on the red side. I'm going to try this and see if this will mix with the orange. If I just scumble it across there very lightly, and that will take down some of that yellow orange and mix it with the red magentas that are in other parts of this painting. And maybe that will help join that sky, since I went that direction with my trees. Yeah, see how that just, there's enough magenta in this orange stick. I'll have to go back over some of this over in here, work on some separation up in there, but yeah, that's knocking down that bright orange, and the painting's coming back together again. This is what I meant earlier when I said working on the painting all at once is a good practice, especially in the beginning. I knew I had to make some changes there, and in color down in here, and that threw my sky off, so I knew I had to go back and do it. Now, where a beginner might not, you as a beginner might not realize, you might put that sky in that we originally did and go, oh, that's a beautiful sky, got great transitions from the horizon up to the sky coming up over us, and leave it after changing the color schemes and color palette down in here, and not realize that now the sky needed to go back over. So working in one area as a beginner might not be as easy, and hence the recommendation that, hey, you need to work on the painting areas and bring it along simultaneously. So in a way, I'm still working simultaneously. It's just like I'm not dropping this pastel down in here and saying, oh, I got to go get that other pastel up in there. I'm keeping it in my mind and knowing I got to go back and fix that bright orange because it's not working with magentas any longer. Okay, I'm going to put some highlights in there. I'm going to do some more adjusting in here and work on these reflections a little bit, especially the reflections of these trees are darker in the water up along here, but that gives you a real good idea of where this is headed and how to take an oil painting. This could have been on canvas. Take an oil painting and use pigment sticks from oils and go over those with pastel and turn it into an 80% pastel surface with the blending. So until next time, everybody, happy painting, and if you're liking these videos, please hit the like button. If you're already subscribed, that helps other people find these topics when they look for it. So take care. I'll have another topic for you, or we'll talk about art next time. Bye-bye.